So I'm looking at my watch and it's 12 o'clock, so I don't know what date it is, but I'm pretty sure it's July the 5th, 2021. Am I right?
That's correct. Yeah.
All right. And this is Dr. Terry West. We are cousins, in law, something like that. And we were talking that you grew up in South St. Louis. You went to Cleveland High School.
That's correct.
But we didn't get to talk about your parents. Tell me a little bit about your mom and dad.
My mom, and of course, they were from the South St. Louis area, which is primarily a German area development. That's Kerstin and Cronolette was had a lot of Germanic people in it. My dad was a postal worker. He worked for the St. Louis Post Office from the time soon after he was graduated from high school, I think, up until his time of death, which was just prior to retirement. He died at age 64. And my mom only worked part of the time while my brother and I were growing up. She stayed at home and went to work at the Lime Bank, actually, after we went off to college. So that's what my dad was the prime supporter for the whole family the whole time. Thinking back on it, I think we were lower middle class portions. My folks never had a whole lot of money, but we did live comfortably. We certainly had all the, I didn't know I was poor when I was a kid, and I always dressed well enough and had enough money to spend to keep myself happy. And we lived in an area of South St. Louis where there was a big open wide field across the street. So from my brother and I played baseball for a long time over there, went to pick up baseball and enjoyed that sort of thing. I went to the Lions grammar school, which is within walking distance of my house, and then went to Cleveland High School, which is some distance away, but the bus ran almost a block away from my house, so I could ride the bus right up to Cleveland High School and go there all the time. When I was about 7 or 8 years old, my mom decided I needed to know how to swim because my mother and my father were not swimmers.
Okay.
So they didn't want me to be in danger of water like they were. So they sent me off to the Cronolette YMCA, which probably was a life-changing situation because I kind of grew up in the YMCA, spending as much time there as I had available when I wasn't going to school. I learned to swim very early, and then eventually learned to play basketball. And so I played basketball in grade school, and then I went on and played basketball in high school. I played for the Cleveland High School basketball team. They were turned out to be state champions in 1954.
Okay.
And we traveled to Cape Girardeau for the final game that we had down in Cape Girardeau. So I grew up enjoying athletics because of the fact that I was a very good swimmer and a fairly good basketball player. So when I went to Cleveland High School, I played at Cleveland High School, and I was a guard, and I was the sixth man on a team, so I played a portion of the time, but I was never a starting player. So after that, after I graduated from Cleveland High School, that's when I went to Washington University.
Okay. So you're talking about your brother. Is it an older brother or younger brother?
My brother Alan was 3 years older than myself.
Okay.
He was actually sort of my guide in many respects because my brother was very good student.
All right.
And in fact, he was proud of the fact that he was voted the most intelligent in his class when he graduated from Cleveland High School. So every time I would go into a new class at the beginning of the semester, and someone would say, "Oh, you're Alan's brother. Yeah, you're going to be a good student. We're going to work well together." And that carried me along the way a lot of the time. And so when I graduated from high school, I was I think I was 10th out of the class, 10th from the top. I had better than 90.
Oh, we got a lot in common. I was 10th from the bottom of the class.
And
now I'm serious. And my wife was in the top 10, and I was at the bottom anyway.
So I graduated fairly high, so I had no problem getting into Washington University. I was in pretty easily.
So your mom and dad was there in South St. Louis.
Yeah.
Where were their parents? Okay, so your dad obviously was a West. Your mother was a...
Her name was Enloe.
Enloe.
E-N-L-O-E. She also lived in the southern South St. Louis area. And my dad was came from a long line of German families, and his name was West, but his brother's name was Kramer, which is a very common German name. Mainly the West and Kramer family worked for Knoxstead Dairy, which was a local dairy company, and they had cows, and they raised the cows, and then they had a fleet of vehicles that would take the milk around and deliver it to them.
Really?
So early in the days, my grandfather drove a milk truck. Drove a milk wagon with a horse.
So they had okay.
And he delivered. And then when it got beyond that, they went into having little trucks and drove around the trucks and delivered milk for them. So my grandfather was a milk delivery guy, and my dad actually graduated from high school, and then went to work for the post office, and that was a job that he had, like I say, all those years.
Yeah.
Anyway, I came from a fairly large family through my dad's side, because his mother had 3 or 4 sisters and a brother, and they all lived in the same neighborhood. My grandmother and grandfather lived right next door to us. Our houses were very close to the same design, because they were built right after each other. And so I lived right in the shadow of relatives the whole time. My Aunt Minnie lived next to me, and next to her was my Uncle Hagan, and so there were 4 houses in a row of all close relatives.
Well, and that's probably one of the biggest differences in society today as it was back in that day, because the people that weren't your neighbors, the people that were your neighbors that weren't your relatives, everybody else was relatives on those streets. So you go down the street and there's 30 houses on this side and there's 30 houses on that side, but there's probably only 4 families with it, because everybody was related, whether you were in Festus or Farmington or South County or anywhere else.
Yeah.
Now we all move across the country. We're not even in the same zip code or area.
Yeah, it was
So
very different.
So how many kids do you have?
We have 2 children,
Okay.
a daughter and a son. Our daughter was born first. She was born in 1961, my son in 1964.
Okay.
And several years after we were married.
Yeah.
She was born in St. Louis right before we moved to Lafayette when she was just a few weeks old, and my son was born in Lafayette 3 years later.
Okay.
And both of them are now fully grown and moved
Yep.
away and living outside of Lafayette, actually.
So your daughter, how many kids does she have?
Our daughter has no children.
No children?
She and her husband were married right out of college. They were married after they both graduated. And he got a job with Texas Instrument, and he's a very capable individual. Texas Instrument hired him, and he worked at Texas Instrument for the next so many years, and he's now just recently retired. So he worked for them for probably something like 35 years.
Yeah.
And she graduated as an interior designer, interior decorator, but she's moved more into commercial type of work. She's always worked for commercial companies. And they moved to Dallas, which is where Texas Instrument is located.
Right.
And she worked as an interior designer the whole time, her whole career, and now she is just recently retired. She's a very, very capable design individual that has extremely excellent taste in things that she designs and has built, and she's a very accomplished individual.
And I have not met her, but we did get the opportunity to meet your son.
Yes, you did. You had an opportunity to meet him, and I think, and his son.
And his son, yes.
And
I thought he was maybe going to Purdue at the time, right? Am I right or wrong?
He went to Purdue. I don't know the immediate timing. I guess he was still a Purdue student when you met him.
Yeah.
And he has since graduated, and he works in Boston now, and is quite an accomplished individual. My son was in finances. He started out as an electrical engineer, and was extremely good at it, but he decided that he didn't want to work with a computer and a computer screen in the basement the rest of his life.
Right.
So in fact, he took on the job of being in financing, and so he went into the finance area and has been very successful at it. He's a CFO of a major company in Chicago now.
Yeah.
So that was the situation there. Now, going back to my parents' situation, my dad because of he was like I say, a German family, probably going back several generations of Germans. My mother is a different situation. She always called herself Scotch Irish and Pennsylvania Dutch, which mainly means that she was probably Scottish, and had a different background than my dad did. Now, after my grandfather stopped delivering milk, he bought a grocery store. So he had a grocery store, and my dad worked in a grocery store as a growing up individual, and he used to deliver groceries. And he delivered groceries to my mom's house, and that's where they met. And so she finally decided that he was a pretty capable guy, so she ended up getting him interested, and they got married after a period of time. So, but she was, the in-laws were of a different background and different nature.
Yeah.
They had recently moved from rural Missouri, I think in the Bourbon area.
Okay.
And they were a little more countrified, I would say, than what the Wests were, which had been city dwellers for many, many years. And so the combination of the two of them worked out pretty well. And so they were, until my dad died at age 64, they were married probably 30 years or so.
So I'm guessing when your dad died at age 64, that was somewhat normal.
That was normal in the days of my dad and his father and grandfather. Back in their 60s, men developed heart problems, and a lot of them died in their 60s. My grandfather, Henry West, died in the 60s.
Right.
And my dad had the same thing, and so there's been heart problems in my family for a long time. Now, I personally have stents in my heart, or I'd have probably been dead like they were. So that's been the difference in the situation.
Well, it makes all the difference in the world, because a couple of stints and you got several more years.
Got 20 years of your life.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was the situation. And after my grandfather gave up the grocery store, he went into the tavern business. So he was a tavern owner in South St. Louis, and located right in an area that his tavern was torn down when they built Interstate 55 down through Crownlet Park and down in that area.
Right.
And took out his tavern. My dad always hated taverns and decided he wasn't going to run the tavern, so they sold it, or otherwise he could have taken it over and been a tavern owner, I guess. So that's the situation.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so very much. I mean, again, I've heard about you my entire life. I've got to know you the past decade, been to your house, kind of went on vacation with you down in Florida, and of course you're here at my parents' house now. Always look forward to it. You mentored my son quite a bit, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
and
super kid.
Yeah, it's just exciting. Thank you very much. Press like and share it. Thank you.